In the vast expanse of the universe, there is a powerful force that flows through all things, a force that connects every living being, every atom, and every fragment of existence. But what if you could harness this energy? What if you could control it with the sheer power of your mind? Generally, people think of magnetism as one of those fundamental forces of nature that makes the fridge magnet stick, keeps the TV running, and even helps make credit card transactions. At the most basic level, magnetism originates from the movement of charged particles. When electricity flows through a wire, it creates a magnetic field around the wire. This is the current scientifically accepted basis for electromagnetism. But Nikola Tesla, one of the greatest pioneers of electrical science, did not view magnetism as a fundamental force in itself. He viewed it rather as a dynamic expression of the dielectric field in motion. According to Tesla, what we commonly refer to as a magnetic field is simply a spatial polarized effect of dielectricity. This dielectricity refers to the ability of material to resist the flow of electric current, while still allowing the presence of an electric field within it. From this perspective, magnetism is not an intrinsic property of moving electrons, but rather the result of dielectric polarization and field interactions within the medium of counterspace. Tesla often spoke of the ether as the true foundation of electromagnetism, where magnetism is merely a secondary effect of dielectric phenomena. A so-called magnetic field is thus not a standalone entity, but rather the result of dielectric energy diverging and seeking equilibrium. Hence, the structures we observe around current-carrying wires or permanent magnets are simply the spatial expressions of dielectric motion, forming a self-sustaining flow. So what if we could use this magnetism to give us the power to bend energy at will? Well, from early times, men have intuitively realized things that they were not always able to rationally describe or explain, and among these men, there were those who had the gift of intuition. This knowledge is largely true, but this is one of those so-called unfortunate truths. For those who've held to such truth are themselves persecuted, humiliated, or ridiculed. This may be traced as early as the time of Pythagoras in the West, and will certainly be known at a still earlier date in India and China. It was not until comparatively recent times that any serious effort was made to apply the principles set forth by these earlier thinkers to the living problem of modern man. One of the pioneers of this unfortunate truth of magnetism was the celebrated Anton Mesmer. Franz Anton Mesmer was a German physician with an interest in astronomy. He theorized the existence of a process of natural energy transference occurring between all animate and inanimate objects, which he called animal magnetism, later referred to as mesmerism. Mesmer's theory attracted a wide following between about 1780 and 1850, and continued to have some influence until the end of the 19th century. In 1843, the Scottish doctor James Braid proposed the term hypnotism for a technique derived from animal magnetism. Today, the word mesmerism generally functions as a synonym of hypnosis. Mesmer was ridiculed for his findings during his time. This might have been the reason why he put most of his essential concepts in cipher and code. Fortunately, the code has long since been deciphered, and mankind has been enlightened by his findings. He advanced his principal beliefs in what are called 27 propositions. These unfold more or less sequentially, and when we read them, it's easy to recognize the influence of the earlier works of Paracelsus. Moreover, it is worth noting here that the mysterious Count Saint-Germain assisted Mesmer in the formulation of his doctrine. Before we go deeper into Mesmer's propositions, let's first talk about Paracelsus. His full name was Philippus Aureolus Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim. He was a Swiss physician, alchemist, lay theologian, and philosopher of the German Renaissance. He was a pioneer in several aspects of the medical revolution of the era, emphasizing the value of observation in combination with the received wisdom. He's also credited as the father of toxicology. He had a habit of mixing medicine with a sprinkle of mysticism. Paracelsus also had a substantial influence as a prophet or diviner, his prognostications being studied by Rosicrucians in the 17th century. Paracelsianism is the early modern medical movement inspired by the study of his works. The concept of Paracelsus and the errors is what we call the atmosphere, or the intervals between planets and suns. This entire area is said to be filled with a mysterious, fluidic substance. This perhaps is the famous ocean of Baileys, upon which he believed the earth floated, and according to him, earthquakes were caused by someone rocking the earth. But this rocking is not literal. In fact, magnetic energy motion is already suspected, as the seismic upheavals may be due to electric or magnetic causes. This also may be what was described by Heraclitus, a pre-Socratic Greek philosopher, who declared that souls first pass into a strange, humid substance, moist but invisible. The sun is believed to be the principal source and regulator of the magnetic fields of the solar system. By extension, all energy or magnetic motion arose from the sun and its alternating varying polarization fluxes. These fluxes were due to motion tides or various changes upon the sun or within the construction. The effect of sunspots would represent, therefore, some change upon the surface of the sun, which produces effects on the earth and among the creatures that inhabit earth. All of this hence becomes the basis for our theory of magnetism, the theory that Mesmer has used to put forth his propositions. And it's only by truly understanding Mesmer's propositions that we can effectively draw on the magnetic power of the sun to improve our lives and even use magnetism as a form of therapy. But before we can understand how to use magnetism, we first need to understand the rules within which it works. Mesmer went with Paracelsus in the theory that all forms in nature exist within this humid magnetic field, that all these forms likewise have a magnetism of their own, subservient to that of the earth and the sun. They theorized that this magnetism was also subject to a certain negative influence from the solar light which is reflected from the surface of the moon. The conclusion thus arrived was that the human body should be supported by a magnetic field. This led to Mesmer's first two propositions. The first proposition is that there exists a mutual influence between the heavenly bodies of the earth and living bodies. The second is the extension of the first. A fluid that is universally spread with unmatched subtlety and incapable of admitting vacuum is capable of receiving, propagating, and communicating all motions. Through the centuries, the appearance of a light, vapor, or field of energy surrounding the human body has come in mysticism to be called an aura. This came to be regarded as a magnetic field under certain conditions. It is thought that almost anyone can, to a degree, perceive this aura, or can become aware and sensitive to its existence. This magnetic field may be key to communication between humans and other forms of life, something which even the present time considers impossible. This perspective was shared by others as well. St. Thomas Aquinas, possibly drawing on the work of his teacher, Albertus Magnus, noted that the human body, being bound by time, is subject to various motions. Albertus Magnus pointed out that the fluids in the brain were controlled tidally by the motion of the moon. Thus, it is conceivable that at least three, probably more, types of pull or push pressures may be found operating on this magnetism. One of these, of course, is the sun. Its motions and its various internal mutations certainly affect magnetism and the earth in many ways. The second being the moon. The third type of influence may come directly from the earth, which has its own internal motions and, like all living creatures, undergoes gradual shifts in magnetic polarity. So now that we understand magnetism, how do we use this power to improve our lives? When these concepts were first put forth, they quickly pushed researchers to study magnetism and how it could heal various ailments. The corruption of flesh is a magnetic process that may be regarded as the result of blood poisoning or something of that nature. If a person's magnetic field were strong, it is thought to be quite conceivable that it would repel the magnetic fields of bacterial organisms, causing some degree of immunity. There is also intriguing evidence, such as Sir Kenelm Digby, a leading physician of the Elizabethan era, who linked the moon to the development of his remedy. He was told to be able to assist in the healing of a wound by destroying certain magnetic substances from the weapon causing the wound. This is interesting, because as pointed out by the French Academy in the last quarter of the 19th century, no implements were necessary, saying that magnetism required no devices, nor any machines for its operation, that it could be most successfully operated by the simple action of the human will. This human will that directed the magnetic currents could be mutated or caused to change the general course and direction. The term mutation here, unlike some modern uses, referred to the ancients as a change or modification within a structure. Mesmer did go against this, creating a system and supporting that system by means of certain instruments. It was later decided that these instruments were important only because Mesmer thought they were. He created devices because he was still bound to the concept that therapy required machinery. According to him, there had to be some physical structure for the controlling and directing of the magnetic agent. He accomplished this direction not by the instrument, but by his belief in the instrument. Hence, he underestimated his own mental activity in which he preconceived the effects of his own treatment. Why did he fall into this trap? The thing is, Mesmer linked magnetism directly to the nervous system, claiming it circulated through the body via the nerves. He believed nerves contained a mysterious, semi-fluid substance, invisible and absent in the dead, but present in the living and controllable by those who understood the magnetic law. Mesmer went still further in affirming that the principal source of derangement within the body might have a magnetic origin. He pointed out that just as the year has its seasons, likewise there are seasons within the life of man. Man is not only subject to the winter around him, but the winter that is within him. He's influenced not only by the grand cycles of the universe, but also by smaller cycles, as he is a miniature world, in which all larger processes are mirrored. Any attitude that results in an unfortunate mutation in the magnetic field, then that attitude must be considered wrong so far as man is concerned. Any thought or emotion that harms his energy resources contradicts the law that governs him. As such, negative influence lead to sickness and possibly ultimate death. If man's conduct is under censorship from his magnetic curve, then a code that applies to the relations between people while protecting the energy of the individual must be observed. While all of this is correct, where he went wrong is assuming that he is incapable of managing his mental attitudes on his own, and deciding that he needed the help of machines to achieve that task. At this point, it's important to keep in mind that magnetism is not confined to Europe. In reality, it's present in all the cultures of the world. People near East and in India, those using this method, report that they can see words coming from people's mouths and that these words have form and energy radiations. They talk of the power or the creative expression of the spoken word or the creative word. This is even branched out to dreams and ideas, said to be sustained by magnetic fields as well. Paracelsus highlighted the magnetism of geometric shapes, patterns, and solids, while other experimenters found that magnetic emanations relate to color. They also recognized that colors, music, and art create specific conditioning areas within a magnetic structure. If reactions of the human personality are excessive, or if man's mental or emotional pressures pollute his magnetic reservoir, it is obvious that his body may in time be corrupted. This is where Paracelsus made another one of his innovative contributions, Paracelsus was convinced that the diseases of man constitute a formula. This formula means that there is an exact and specific relationship between the various aspects of man's consciousness and the afflictions that burden his flesh. He did not feel that man's attitude poisoned his magnetic core, and then this poison merely distributed itself through the body, wreaking havoc. He held that each attitude is a particular event, and that this effect will be set forth through a particular function and process structural organs within the human body. Thus, all forms of excess and their various kinds can be directly linked to ailments. The appearance of certain ailments may, in turn, reveal imbalances in one's life, whether recognized or not. Out of this thinking has come a doctrine that is somewhat reminiscent of that of Indian yoga, namely that salvation for all things lies in non-interference. The moment man blocks or obstructs the processes of the universe, he is sick. If this sickness does not immediately affect his body, it affects his emotions, causing him to be unhappy or to suffer. This means that the moods of the individual result in color mutation in the aura, and that these mutations may also take on geometric or symbolic forms. In Greek and classical philosophy, the controlling mind of the universe was the mind of a deity. Magnetism served as the medium through which certain mental energies of the deity were dispersed. These energies flowed through currents or channels, reaching even the most remote areas of space. Magnetism suggests that this energy is not solely in constant motion, but rather, while it exists everywhere and in everything, it is channeled. Within space, certain processes or channels help maintain the energy's form and prevent it from dissipating. The concept suggests that the mind can direct magnetism from one person to another. Mesmer believed that the mind may also be capable of projecting magnetism over an indefinite distance. This indefinite distance perhaps constitutes the sympathy that has been recorded between persons at a great distance who still were conscious or aware of the actions of others. This can be observed in the case of the death of Lord Nelson. At the time, he died at Trafalgar, and Lady Hamilton, who was in England, fell in a swoop declaring that Nelson was dead. This sympathy, according to Paracelsus, was due to the possibility of the projection of the mind in the field of magnetism. This is how we will use magnetism as therapy to improve our lives. But before this method can be effectively applied, a deep understanding of the underlying agents is essential. Consciousness and mind are the key agents through which magnetism can be harnessed. It is then accepted that nature would have set up a pain mechanism for that very purpose. In other words, pain causes acute awareness. Pain causes the individual to turn his attention to the area where the pain exists. Pain accompanies many forms of injury and appears to be a subconscious, natural remedy, drawing healing energy to the affected area through the attention of the sufferer. Pain creates a localized frequency or vibratory rate, directing energy to the area we become acutely aware of through discomfort, illustrating the truth of energy flow. Hypnosis will cause the person to be unaware of pain in an area, or become aware of pain in some other area where it does not exist. Therefore, pain is essentially a mental phenomenon linked to the body's need for energy. Wherever pain occurs, it heightens the individual's awareness of that specific area. A study supports this idea, showing that when a person hits their thumb with a hammer, magnetism instantly flows into the area. In that moment, the individual forgets themselves, focusing solely on the sensation of the injury. His consciousness focuses on his thumb, and energy or magnetism moves accordingly. This results in a heavy concentration of magnetism at the pain site. If the individual is unaware of this and does not recognize any underlying issues beyond the pain, this excess energy can accumulate. If the energy isn't needed in that area, or is drawn in an exaggerated manner, it can lead to tension or hypertension. We know that certain medications, when taken by healthy individuals, can make them sick. but when taken by those suffering, can help remedy the condition or provide relief. For example, it is well known that a person in extreme pain may use certain narcotics with relative safety, but if used without pain, they are much more likely to become addicted. In magnetism, the same principle seems to hold true. Wherever a man turns his attention, particularly within his own body, he's apt to lose sight of focusing only on his ailments. For instance, a person who becomes overly focused on a particular bodily function is likely to disrupt it by directing unnecessary energy toward it. A singer becoming too conscious of the structure of the throat and the technique of voice production will have difficulty in singing and will lock his voice, whereas if he becomes completely absorbed in his view and becomes unaware of his own existence, he will sing with relaxation. These examples suggest that tension draws materials, and when these materials are unnecessary, their excess creates an imbalance, leading to further difficulties. If, however, these materials are desperately needed for some remedial process, then the centering of energy brings with it relief. But this doesn't mean that this power is limitless. The mind's ability to direct energy is subject to its own limitations and flaws, which can lead to misdirection or failure. In the case of magnetic healing, there's always the risk that a preconceived notion of the ailment, a faulty diagnosis, or a misguided application of energy may cause the patient more harm than healing. It is therefore true in this, as in all other things, that the energy field of the patient must determine the patient's need, and not the intellectual attitudes of the physician. This is subtle, and takes away from the field some of its most interesting aspects. Man is now curtailed in his glorious privilege of exerting mind over matter. He is no longer set up as an arbitrary determinant of what others need. It is a long-standing tradition that attempts to diagnose by formula, by precedent. This often leads to the unrecognized truth that the patient's magnetic field serves as a living diagnosis at all times. But coming back to our main topic, if all of these elements are imbalances of this magnetic field, what then could be considered therapy? St. Paul, as expressed in Corinthians, for it was learned through experience that the three most powerful emotional or mental projections by means of which therapy could be attained. In the magnetic field, these were the three attitudes of faith, hope, and love. This can be related to the events of present times. Today, many leaders in various fields often lack strong faith, having lost much of their religious grounding, and without a firm ethical framework to replace it, they fail to recognize the importance of constructive belief in health. This decline in faith in goodness, right, and in God, could very well lead to a broader dilemma regarding magnetism. If the absence of faith is a loss, and criticism in place of faith is nearly as destructive to energy, then the rise of negative attitudes should lead to greater exhaustion. This is proven true, as despite living in an era of more leisure and luxury than ever before, most of us still report feeling tired. If fatigue signals a depletion, improper tidal motion, or even a reversal of the magnetic field's current, we can assume that the growing sense of doubt, insecurity, and fear, along with a loss of the natural tendency to foster sensitive, constructive attitudes, may be affecting our bodies through the magnetic field. It would be a fair assumption that a collective magnetism, where millions of persons hold certain negative attitudes, creates a common dilemma. This might go so far as to adversely affect the magnetic field of the planet. Thus, it cannot be assumed for a moment that man suffers alone. His negative psychic and emotional attitudes affect the other kingdoms of nature around him. This leads us to be concerned with various circumstances resulting in loss of harvest, the failure of trees to bear good fruit, and the failure of many natural processes. Science has identified various causes, but it's possible that among them is the general inertia or depletion resulting from the collective impact of our attitudes on both personal and earth magnetism. There is proof that faith developed in man at some remote time because he intuitively recognized the need for faith. The faith came not from the imposing of the clergy, but came originally from the interior need for comfort, from not spiritual consolation alone, but simple physical comfort. The individual then began to organize these primitive impulses to the formation of religion. The problem of indifference also plays a part in the magnetic theory. Energy moves with interest, it moves with concern, it moves with all kinds of active attitudes. It does not move, however, from indifference. Indifference is the ultimate degree of detachment. It means that there is no sympathy, no relationship, no common ground. It doesn't necessarily indicate antagonism in the magnetic fields, but it often prevents the flow of energy or interest that could improve an acquaintance or association. Indifference represents failure to report any stimulation or any activity of interest, whereas a man seeking to relax or to obtain freedom from pressure is not working with indifference. To make a virtue of indifference would be equivalent to making a virtue of ignorance, or to assume that not knowing is good. In nature, your ignorance is never beneficial, false knowledge is harmful, and true knowledge is crucial. Indifference is not relaxation, nor is it protection. If an individual becomes indifferent or tries to escape a situation both physically and psychologically, they will gain little benefit. Rather than indifference, there must be a strong, but perhaps rather impersonal sense of values. Uncontrolled and excessive emotional outbursts do no good on any level, and on the psychic plane, they cause significant harm. Anything that causes an explosion in the body's energy fields will have an effect similar to an explosion on Earth, like the bombings of Nagasaki or Hiroshima. These explosions cause tremendous cataclysms. Excessive outbursts immediately affect the body, damaging its structure and hastening its eventual breakdown, much like excessive grief, worry, or fear. Irrational, unreasonable attitudes, such as unsympathetic, critical, or defamatory ones, especially those known to be wrong in conscience, have all been proven to be magnetically harmful. It then seems to be indicated that help to the individual can be very often greatly changed, or helped by his own ability to direct energy. Man is not yet so completely endowed with an understanding of self-control. By remaining fair, reasonable, and temperate in all his attitudes, a person can avoid the ravages of negativity as their magnetic field will improve. Early on, it was noted that a strong and important magnetic bond exists between a mother and child. This magnetic connection is polarized through the thymus gland, with a powerful magnetic force from the mother remaining active in the child's body until around the age of 7. During this period, a mother's concern for her child has a profound and immediate impact. In some cases, a mother's intense devotion has even been able to bring a desperately ill child back to life through the immense concentration of her energy. It's very important to note that parenthood becomes a significant responsibility in magnetism, because during this time, the child, bound to the mother through the thymus gland, is almost like an identical twin. Any thought or emotion from the parents deeply affects the child, especially since the child is more receptive to these energetic influences than to words or visible actions. The thymus gland, then, symbolizes a psychic umbilicus connecting parent and child. So how do we learn more about our own magnetic forces and ascertain if there is any imbalance in our attitude systems? The most common signs of imbalance include failures in processes like digestion and assimilation, minor heart disturbances, tension, nerve stress, or the gradual loss of function in a body part. Whenever such issues arise, the magnetic healer should avoid the tendency to temporarily exaggerate the current of magnetism in the patient's body. Therefore, we must assume that a successful magnetic healer must have a substantial amount of magnetism available to them. If their own supply is limited, or they cannot establish a connection to the general source of magnetism, their success will be short-lived. Even if the healer is successful, he will deplete himself and perhaps wreck his own health. Experimentation is the only way in which the magnetics can determine the degree to which he can expend energy. Increasing the use of energy can encourage the magnetic field to find a greater supply, provided the conditions are right. By directing energy into areas where it has been blocked, or where the body's natural currents struggle to flow, the magnetic field can break up congestion, stimulate sluggish functions, and open the body to the healing potential of its own energy. Thus, the person having been relieved of the obstruction may then be able to take over with his own energy fields. As far as maintaining one's own magnetism goes, the two most important sources of magnetism are respiration and nutrition. It is not known if exposure to the sun is a good source. It is during the period of sleep that the magnetic field does most of its repair work upon the ordinary wear and tear of the day. If the person therefore lives a relatively normal life, his energy supplies will be reasonably adequate, or will respond very quickly to any form of specialized therapy. Most people today do not feel they are living normal, contented lives. As a result, there's a constant depletion of energy without adequate replenishment. One of the body's processes that demands significant energy is supporting the complex structure through which the mind operates on the brain. This energy requirement is much greater than that needed for physical labor. Visualization is perhaps hailed as the most effective method of observing this practice, which can be done without the assistance of a magnetic. It is the process of imprinting upon the consciousness of vision of well-being. Visualization, in connection with a wound, is the inner process of recognizing that the wound is naturally and normally healing. If stated merely as a platitude, this idea is relatively meaningless. However, if held as a fact in consciousness, it will influence the availability of energy, as the magnetic field will accept the pattern and work to fulfill it. Magnetics have used visualization as the foundation for other branch practices. These include chakra balancing, which focuses on specific energy centers in the body to harmonize their flow. Aura cleansing involves visualizing the removal of negative energy from the aura, while Reiki uses the practitioner's hands to channel universal energy for healing. Qigong, a Chinese practice, combines breathwork, movement, and visualization to cultivate internal energy that they call qi. In conclusion, magnetism is the practice of using your mind to consciously influence and manage the energy that is believed to surround and permeate all living things. It is often associated with concepts in spirituality, energy healing, and mindfulness practices. The idea is to cultivate awareness of this energy and intentionally direct its flow through focused intention and visualization techniques. Whether you're a believer or a critic, it reinforces the undeniable truths that faith, love, and hope are what sustain us all.